Start with our default cube. Going to zoom in slightly and go into edit mode, and we'll start with vertex select. If we go ahead and select a single vertex and press the G key twice, now that turns on sliding. That's all there is to it. And now we can see that this vertex will move along the edges that already exist. If we do the same thing with edge select turned on, it will move along the faces. If just G once will do that, and the second G will help slide it along the faces that already exist. And with face select, it will slide along, press G twice, it will slide along the existing edges that exist, that make up that face. Now, one thing to bear in mind, if I accept that slide and have a look at the operator panel, we're not moving it an amount, we're moving it a factor. So 50%, if we wanted this to be half height, would be 0.5. And we've got some other options here that may be suitable depending on the model that you're doing. But that's something to bear in mind, that as you're moving it, you're actually moving it relative to the overall size, in this case, of the edges that make up this cube, with 0 being in the middle, -1 being 100% one way, and 1 being 100% the other way. Of course, in this case, we just want 0.5. There we go. Now, this is going to be useful throughout your modeling, and that's why it's just a quick tip. But I want you to... Hello everybody and welcome back. We're going to have a look at a form of subdivision, which is chopping up a face. As you can see here, we've chopped up the top face and actually extruded some additional detail from it. We'll have a look at the specials menu as well, and we'll have a look at why, if I go into edit mode, this can be a good and a bad thing as well, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Let's find out more and hop on over into Blender. Hello everybody and welcome back. So we have our model in front of us here, and I'm going to demonstrate the subdivision on our live model as well, because I want you to play around with it. Make sure you've got a copy of your file wherever it may be before we continue. So since this is the 15th one here, I'm going to call this 15 challenge even before we get started. So let's select these top faces, and now we want to do an operation on them. And it's the subdivide operation. Now, there is a subdivision surface modifier that you may have heard of before, but we're going to touch upon that later on in the course. If you use the right mouse button, it will bring up a context menu, in this case, the face context menu. This is a specials menu deliberately set up for face selection.
Hey guys, Mark here. Quick update for you. The right-click menu here has actually been renamed. It was incorrectly named in a previous version of Blender. It's now the Vertex context menu. Still right-click to bring up the specials, but now it's called Vertex, and you click to subdivide. With that in mind, back to Mikey.
And at the top there, we've got subdivide, and that's what we're going to do. And you can see what it has done is it's subdivided the faces as they were. So you haven't got equal subdivisions everywhere, it just depends on what the underlying geometry was. If I subdivide that again, what I could then do is mimic the state that I had before and select this area here, here and here. And before we know it, we can then extrude that up and we've got some extra detail. Okay, I'm mixing up a few genres of buildings here. I'm sure they didn't look quite like that, but to demonstrate the point of subdivision, we've now added extra geometry to our model really, really quickly. Now, there is a couple of issues with this. The first one is that all of these edges, this one going around here, if I hold down Alt and Shift and select these are all superfluous. They're not needed. Now, before we go and get rid of them, I want to show you one of the issues that we've just created for ourselves. If we go ahead and select this face here and try and subdivide that, nothing happens. Or has it? How about this face here? Let's select... with face select turned on, this face here and subdivide. Nothing's happened. Well, it has. What we've effectively done is we've chopped this face up into even smaller edges, and that's going to cause us no end of issues. So if I go to edge select, we can see that it's got an edge there, an edge there. All these little micro edges are now making up this single face. In fact, with the face selected, we can see that the number of edges that make up that face are 14, and that's not apparent by just looking at it. So what can we do to sort that out? Well, I'm going to undo a couple of steps there until I see that I've got my top bits selected again. There we go. Alt Shift and select that top one there. So one of the issues with subdividing like that is you cause a load of extra and unnecessary geometry. And we can get rid of that by dissolving. So we can press the X key and dissolve those edges. And we can do the same for these and this one across the middle as well. Now, before I do that, I do want to show you that it also breaks loop cutting. So if I was to go Control and R, you can see that that bit there I can loop cut, and the loop cut itself stops at that face. It won't go any further. And that's because these faces that once were quads, I only had 4 sides, now have multiple edges. So Blender just doesn't know what to do. So let's go ahead, dissolve these top edges here and see if we get back our loop cut around our model. Brilliant. That's exactly what I wanted to see. And it's not going around this way. Now that's interesting, but if we turn around to the side, we see exactly why it's doing that. If we turn around here, we see that it's not cut down here. However, it is on this part. So when we cut through our model initially and made these 2 areas where we're going to put our steps and our ramp in a few lectures time, here we don't have that. In fact, this face here is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we can double check it down here as well, 6 edges. That's not ideal. However, depending what stage of modeling you're currently at, and whether it's just a prototype that you're going to eventually show someone without details of its topology, how the mesh is laid out, I would argue that it's not worth trying to solve that little conundrum at the moment as to how to make sure this has continuous edge flow going around it. That's a lot of extra work for actually no apparent gain. The danger is that one of these edges is inadvertently selected, and let's move it on the y-axis, or it's moved slightly. And now you've got a face that really can't exist. It is bent and all over the place. And that, I don't know if it will, but that can cause us some very weird, yet you can see it there. We've got this odd diagonal line coming across the surface of our model. Our lamp's not particularly strong in this case. If I was to select it, whilst not in edit mode, there we go. Go GZ and lift it up slightly, and go G, which way do we need to move it? On the y-axis. If I make sure that that face is actually illuminated, we can see that there are all sorts of funny artifacts going on, especially at low angles for the light by the looks of it. If I move the light to just the right angle, it really shows it off. There we go. We start to get these horrible artifacts going around, and that can be avoided with good topology. In fact, look, there's a line going across here, and there shouldn't be by our own reckoning. And it just looks odd and horrible. And that's because the underlying mesh doesn't match with what we're really seeing. And Blender's trying to make up for it in the meantime. Now, whilst we're in object mode, what we could try is having the object selected, right-clicking and turning on Shade Smooth. That will sometimes sort out those type of problems. And as you can see in this case, it doesn't actually help us at all. We'd have to do lots more work to the model to make it conform to having smooth shading turned on. So I'm going to go back to shading flat because that's just the nature of the object we're doing at the moment. And I'm going to fix this little issue here by simply undoing a couple of steps. There we go. But just be aware of the extra geometry that you're creating when you're doing this type of work. And the one final thing that I want to look at here, let's put it back into solid shading for the moment, is loop cutting around the edge here. Now, that's absolutely fine if we wanted to put a doorway just here. But if we wanted to go ahead and add in something going around the entire model, we'd be a bit stuck. And that's because we decided to do this top part of our model before loop cutting around this area here. Before we started adding these top sections on, we could have easily put a loop cut around our model. In fact, if I go back and revert this to its previous state, nothing to lose whilst doing that, you can see I can indeed cut around the model. So do plan your work going forward, because often you can find yourself being able to do something one moment and then being unable to do it the next because of the decisions that you made in the future. So now I can go ahead and subdivide those top areas and do exactly the same as I did before to add extra detail. So subdividing has a lot of benefits because we're able to add extra detail to our model. However, as you can see, it's going to fall flat at some point when you're going around your model. And this is where good topology, or the layout of your vertices, edges and faces, really comes into its own and makes working with Blender a lot easier. And you'll learn those skills as you become more proficient as a modeler. But for now, it's time for your challenge. It's going to be about a bit of a refresher, and also just to show you some of the other selection methods that are available to you in Blender. First of all, and this is the primary one, you've got to tell Blender what you're selecting: vertices, edges or faces, and you can use 1, 2 and 3 to go through those as well, providing you're not emulating NumPad. Now if we turn all 3 on by holding down Shift and selecting them, there can be an issue selecting faces. I just managed to select a face straight off then, but you can end up having to click several times to get the face selected. So, and this is a great example of where just saying I want to select faces is great, because then we can come through and every click you know is going to select a face, even if it initially isn't the one you intended to select. Now, going to our tool shelf, I just want to highlight the fact that there's a selection type. We've got select box, select circle and select lasso. And you have to hold your mouse button down when you're selecting this area to have this drop down appear. And by default, select box is the one that's there, which means we can draw a box around, and anything, any face in this case that's within that box gets selected. Now, if you notice along the top, we have new, add, subtract, difference and intersect. The main ones that I tend to use are add and subtract. In this case, if you draw a new area, it is a new area. It will deselect what was selected before and then add in the new stuff. If we had add selected, that's like holding down Shift all the time. So this is great if you can't get to that Shift key to add to your selection. And subtract, as you probably have guessed, removes your selection. Difference is, let's select something first so we can do a difference. If I select this area in the middle, it's like a subtraction. It's what differs with these. And intersection is what intersects when you draw that box around. It's almost like keep the ones that the box is on. And that's also available under Select Lasso, which is more for organic models or ones that aren't nice and square like our pyramid here, and acts in exactly the same way. The one that doesn't act quite in the same way is the circle select, and when you have this turned on, you can use the left click to actually just draw over your model and select things that way. At the very top, you can adjust the radius, so if it's too large, you can come in with a smaller one, and we can hold down Control to start undoing these faces, which can be incredibly useful because, let's say, selecting this ramp here, we can just draw a line straight down and boom, everything's selected. Now I have a bit of a hit and miss of what's selected at the moment, and so I can double tap the A key or go Alt and A to deselect everything, and A will select everything. So it's up to you how you decide to use that functionality. Typically in Blender, Alt and a letter will undo what the letter did to begin with. And a quick shout out here to Mark, our student instructor, who kindly made sure that I remembered to tell you guys that you can also press the W key. When you press the W key, it will cycle through those different selection methods. And the final one I want to show you is expanding and shrinking selections. So say I select this area at the very top of our pyramid, I can then use Control and the NumPad plus to expand the selection. And we can see here one of the problems with having uneven geometry. So up until this point on the top of this building, it has even geometry as you're going out. Then it becomes uneven because we've reached the edge on just the next expansion, and that can cause problems when you're trying to select something. If it was perfectly even, we could select the bottom as we have done here and then expand from that, and you can see it does expand evenly. And eventually, as you can see here, the top does also equalize. I'm going to deselect everything, and I'm going to hold down Alt as I select this top set of faces. So as we've experienced before with edge selecting, you can hold down Alt and select an edge loop. You can hold down Alt while faces are being selected and select a face loop. So with that face loop selected, what we can do is we can do something a bit more advanced. We could go to our select menu and you can see all of the other types of selection you can do. Keep skipping off of it there. And one of the great things you can do is selecting similar. And you can see the shortcut key there is Shift and G. Now there are lots of other options here, My favourite sometimes, depending on when your model itself is coplanar, so anything that exists in the same plane as that one can be selected, but one that is very useful is normal. So basically that's saying, please select all of the other faces as part of this particular model that are facing in the same direction, whose normals match. And if I go ahead and do normal, you can see here that all of the upwards facing normals are selected. If I were to select this face here, at the very front. In fact, I don't want everything selected as I've done there, so I'm just going to deselect. I'm also going to switch my selection back to select box because that's what it's on by default. Now if I go select similar, normal, you can see all of the faces that are facing in the positive Y direction have been selected, even the ones that are just shadowed on the back side of this model, and probably, there you go, the inside walls as well on this doorway. So that concludes our look around selection in this lecture, and it's time to put those skills to the test.